Hello and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Jayn Steele is a certified food addiction counselor and addiction recovery coach. She specializes in assessing and treating food addiction, including behavior regarding food and body image, binge eating and purging, and excessive dieting. She herself has gone through the process of recovering her own health after getting sober 25 years ago and after trying nearly every diet and nutrition plan imaginable. Today, she enjoys a life free of addiction from food, and sugar especially, and is on the other end of those cravings. Now, her passion is to help others find recovery and freedom from this complex and misunderstood addiction outlet. Jayn Steele, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Casey, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be doing this today.
It's an absolute pleasure. As I was going through and doing some research on you and your work and all the things that you offer, I was looking through on the podcast interviews to see where I could find you, and I was shocked that I could not find you anywhere. Is this really your first podcast interview?
Yes, it is. Huh. Yes. So,
wow.
Yes. Super grateful that you, I feel like the undiscovered Pamela Anderson or something like that.
That's great. We are so thrilled and honored to be the very first one to break you out. And I've got news for you. I don't think this is going to be your last one.
Thank you. We'll see.
Well, let's start by getting to know you. I know you're up in Canada. Is that right?
I am. I'm in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, which is southern tip of Vancouver Island, just north of Seattle, for those of you in America.
That's great. How long have you been there?
I think about 7 years. I'm from Vancouver originally, which is just a short ferry ride away on the mainland.
I've heard it's just absolutely beautiful up there. It's such a cool spot in the world that we need to explore a little bit more. Are you planning on staying up there?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. There's very little COVID here, lots of nature, lots of good friends, family. No reason to leave.
That sounds amazing. Well, I think I should have been born in Canada. I love ice hockey. I apologize for things I didn't actually do. I'm way too polite to people. Some of my favorite guests that we've had on the show have been Canadian. So we are absolutely thrilled that you are here with us today. Let's dive in a little bit to your personal story and kind of your history there and how you got into food addiction.
Yeah. Oh, good question. And, when I was preparing for this, I started to kind of write things down to give you a bit of a timeline. And I'll try and chunk it so I don't get too lost in the weeds with the detail. But I had a very normal, privileged, I would say, childhood, lovely parents, brother, cat, no real sign of overt food addiction in our home. My mother was very conscientious about no processed food. She, stayed at home with us while our father was at work, and she made meals from scratch. But it was around the time I was 11 or 12, I guess, when I hit puberty, that I became agitated, hormonal, I guess, and was just really drawn to like cigarettes, alcohol. My mother did make wine. And one night when they were out, I had this grand idea to drink half a bottle of wine by myself to see what happened. And, I got dizzy, warm, happy. I think I went to excess that night, ended up, getting quite sick, going to bed early, woke up the next day and was like, wow, I cannot wait to do that again.
Wow.
And of course, alcohol, as we know, is a derivative of sugar and grain. So that's how it all kind of links in here. But that was really the start of when I started using substances that I can remember. And I started smoking. My dad was a smoker. I used to steal his cigarettes. He kept them in a carton on top of the fridge. I started using marijuana after that, started sneaking out. Like I really kind of went a bit crazy in the addictive substances through my teens. And then the food addiction started around age 18, where it got quite serious. I moved away to England and was in a relationship then, which broke up. Sort of a long story, but it kind of devastated my life plan. I thought I was going to live in England and live happily ever after, and that didn't work out. And that's where a lot of my food addiction symptoms started. I started restricting my food. I started drinking even more. I started working in a pub, and that's where I first started eating a lot of processed foods because it came free with the job kind of thing. And that's where I gained weight for the first time. I'd always been normal, slim. yeah. And then I guess that's where the obsession then around dieting, negative body image started, depression, this relationship breakup, a lot of the alcohol, processed food, all of it was kind of um, amalgamating together. And when I came home back to Canada, it started, yeah, that was the beginning of a 5-year really awful spiraling into binging and purging, laxative use.
Wow.
Started seeing psychologists, started, um, suicidal ideation, that kind of thing. It was really bad. I kind of tried to pull myself together and go to university, but I had to drop out because my binging and purging had gotten so bad. I even went off to India. I had some sort of idea that maybe my problem was that I was atheist and needed to find some sort of spiritual center. I had some friends who'd gone to India, and I thought, well, maybe I'll find some purpose or meaning in India. So I kind of wandered around in India, and I found other drugs to do in India, and more dieting. I'm sort of embarrassed to admit this, but I was having these secret fantasies of getting amoebic dysentery and being more effortlessly able to be really thin. So I walked around with no shoes. I wasn't careful with the water I was drinking. Happy if I got diarrhea, like that. That's where my obsession with food and weight and dieting and body image had taken me to some really unsafe, risky practices. When I got back, that's when I was severely under weight, tried all kinds of different therapies. And yeah, anyway, it was 5 years of sort of spiraling into darker areas. Anyway, eventually at age 23, I was about 88 pounds. I had been involved in, I was on welfare. I'd burnt pretty well every bridge to family and friends that I had. I was unemployable. I binging and purging constantly. I couldn't eat anything without it turning into a full-on binge. And I ended up in a detox, and that was where a 12-step recovery program panel came in, and I was introduced to the notion that I might be an addict. And that was where things really turned around for me. So that was 25 years ago, and I have been clean and sober from alcohol and other drugs since. But the food thing has been a lot more tricky because, of course, we can't just abstain from food. We got to figure out some way to eat, and then there's the other piece of feeling good and not being obsessed and kind of being at the right weight and the right energy and so on. And I really struggled with that. I ended up for about 15 years having my binging and purging in remission, was at a normal weight, if you will. But I was noticing more and more obsessive thinking around carbohydrates. And I always felt hungry, and I always seemed to be carrying around 10 extra pounds than what I wanted. That carried on for quite some time until I found a 12-step program. This is about 10 years ago. And it's the same one. I don't know if you've heard of Bright Line Eating.
No, I haven't.
Okay. There's a brilliant woman. Her name is Susan Pierce Thompson. I believe she's got a PhD in, what is it? It's like, anyway, I'm not sure, but she was a proponent of this particular 12-step program. And she then branched out and created a more secular commercial application of it, where it's weighed and measured meals, whole foods, and abstaining from flour and sugar. So I went into this program, and that's where I started to get some clarity around, that there was some biochemistry going on with flour and sugar. Weighing and measuring meals was very helpful. I was accustomed before that to sort of constant grazing or snacking, whereas this was 3 succinct meals. There was also daily connection with a sponsor to talk about kind of feelings and commitment for the day. And that was where I was first introduced to prayer and meditation. Actually, was through this 12-step program. All of these were super helpful. What was not helpful was that there was an element in there of extreme control and rigidity. I don't know if it was the sponsor I had or the program itself, but I got kind of back into the anorectic thinking and behavior. And I found that in order to maintain my weight, which was normal low at this point, I had to consume vast quantities of it, like huge. It was a very high vegetable, very low fat program. And I still often, even though I was stuffed, like volume wise, I still had cravings in between meals.
Mm.
I was also getting a bit of a skin reaction, kind of itchy skin and a lot of gas and bloating. Anyway, I ended up leaving that program after about 18 months, following a relapse into binging and purging, which I hadn't done for about 15 years. And so for the last 10 years, Casey, I realize now that was actually my primary addiction. There's something to do with the endorphins that get released and a dissociative trance associated with binge eating and then purging. There's a kind of a high involved, that once I reactivated it, it was very hard to stop. So I struggled again with sort of trying to find other types of programs. And I guess it was about 4 years ago that I stumbled into paleo. So again, cutting away flour and sugar, as well as grains and fruit and dairy, and really trying to focus on, I was eating a lot of chicken, eggs, greens, avocado, and a little bit of olive oil. So yeah, I guess I would call it paleo. And that seemed to provide some relief from the physiological cravings, but not fully. There were a number of stressors, I guess, a couple of years ago. And a friend of mine, I was doing some counselor training at the time because I'd had a career change. She told me about the INFACT school in Iceland. It's called the International School for Food Addiction Counselor Training. And she had done it, not so much for counselor training, but because she had a binge eating issue. And their counselor training program had a treatment component that all the counselors had to go through. And that sounded interesting to me. And a couple months later, I had a really dreadful binging and purging relapse that I hadn't had for about 20 years. I mentioned to you that it got really bad, sort of between the ages of 18 and 23. That was the time that I was going on, like 14-hour long binges, driving around in my car to fast food places, stopping at gas stations to purge. It was really violent and really out of control. And that's where I found myself again in June of 2019. And after 5 days of that, I was like, oh my God, I'm ringing the bell. I need some help. So I phoned the director of this program, and she interviewed me and said, yes, you would do well here. We need people like you. It sounds like you have food addiction. And so that was the first time I'd ever really heard of that concept versus eating disorder. I'd always been labeled as eating disordered before that, and told that the way to heal that was to eat all foods in moderation, follow the Canada Food Guide, and get therapy, because it's a disease of control, and it's to do with your family of origin or whatever. I can't even tell you how much therapy I've had, Casey, and it didn't make any darn difference.
That's crazy.
If I eat something that triggers the biochemical addictive response, it doesn't matter. It's like someone who has a fish allergy eating fish. It's going to put a cascade of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and urges and cravings into me. That's akin to addiction.
Wow.
So yeah. Anyway, I've just not big monologue. Go ahead.
No. That's great. It's so interesting. And I love, this was going to be one of my questions to you is I had, sent you a list of some potential things we might talk about. And I said on there, disordered eating or disordered eater. And you corrected me and said, it's actually food addiction. And I was going to ask you what makes the difference, but it kind of was like a little light bulb there where you explained it. It sounds like the first one, like a disordered eater, you're blaming the person, where the second one, it kind of like objectifies it a little bit. Is that correct?
Kinda, yeah. So with an addiction, it's physiological. It's to do mostly with the brain reward system, that whole dopamine system that is altered in someone who has addiction. And really, no matter how much therapy or willpower or whatever, it's just like alcoholism. If you ingest it, it's going to cause a craving, period. And there's nothing you can do about it. You can never learn to moderate. So with an addiction, that's what makes it different than, I guess, what our culture calls eating disorder. The term I think is more helpful is perhaps harmful eater. And I learned this term as part of my training with InFact. One of the faculty members is a brilliant woman, registered nurse and addiction specialist named Bitten Johnson from Sweden. And she talks about harmful eating as exactly that. There's an emotional component, a habitual component, maybe a lack of education about food and nutrition and so on, poor habits. So someone who's a harmful eater, yes, with behavior modification or therapy and enough motivation, because they don't have that sort of brain wiring issue that someone who has an addiction does. You could learn to moderate. And sure, with therapy, you can learn to kind of eat normally, all foods in moderation.
Interesting.
Someone with addiction, though, no, you can't.
Okay.
You've got to abstain.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was going to be another one of my questions. It's like, if you are addicted to drugs, it's like you're done. You can't have any more. You've reached your limit. It's almost like, I mean, I would think the same way of like a type 2 diabetic. Like, look, some people can get by with some, but you are to the point, you just no more. It's got to be out.
Exactly. And it does get tricky because, people with addiction, of course, often do have, the emotional issues as well, or the psychology. I mean, most of us do, who wouldn't benefit from some therapy or some communication skills training or whatever. But fundamentally, the abstinence, dealing with the biochemistry's got to be a baseline. Otherwise, it's just too difficult.
Wow. It was interesting to hear your story and to hear you talk about all the different diet journeys you've gone on. And I don't have that kind of food addiction in me. I never have. I've been fortunate that way. But hearing you describe like, yes, this diet made me feel like a little bit better, but not quite there. And this one was a little bit better, but not quite there. Like I can totally relate to that. Of course you were going to eat a lot of food and be really full, but probably not really satiated when you went to paleo. But then like I think back when I was eating a ton of vegetables and a lot of chicken breasts and salads and things like that, I never craved them. I never got addicted to kale. Why do people get addicted to sugar, but they don't get addicted to apples or something?
That is a great question. And it's interesting that you mention apples, because apples do have a high sugar content. And depending on the severity of a person's addiction and their sensitivity, fruit can really be a problem. So some of us can binge on fruit too. So it necessitates elimination of that as well.
Great point.
Yeah.
Great point.
But that being said, kale, usually not. And I believe it has everything to do with the fructose or sugar content. It lights up the brain more so than cocaine does. There's MRI scans that show this. It's very, very well documented. There's all kinds of resources on it. And I mean, the frightening thing is we think it's a treat. We give it to children. It's in baby formula,
So ubiquitous.
I know, choir here. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Once we made it so cheap and easy to fly all over the world, the quantities available to us are ungodly. And I'm going to stick with the apple analogy for a second and just say that if we think about those apples, the apples that most people get in a grocery store are like the size of a softball. They're not what a natural apple would be. And I'm assuming that where most people live, they're not just walking around with apples growing all over the place. They might have some at some part of the year that are natural to that area, but that's it. It's not like sugar it shouldn't be available all the time. Is that right?
Exactly. I think so. Yeah. I'm a big proponent of the whole ancestral eating and, and I think I agree with you with sort of GMO and the sort of global distribution of fruit and making it sweeter, larger, constantly available, and then marketing it as a health food. It's no wonder many of us are eating a lot of it, too much of it, and it can cause metabolic issues as well as some addiction dependence issues. Yeah, I agree.
We talk a lot too about like why would the body want to adapt with something that's bad for it. So I wouldn't even say that sugar itself is bad if there's a reward system that works like cocaine in the brain. Like that had to have been there for a very long time. And again, if we go back to the apples example, why wouldn't our bodies want to reward us when we found sugar? Because it's going to be very temporary. It's not going to be all year. You can increase your insulin and add some fat, which is going to be your energy when maybe, there's no more apples. So I wonder if those really deep entrenched kind of signals that we have in our brain are actually for a really, really good reason. It's just we flipped the script on everything and change the context.
I couldn't agree with you more. Yes. And you're probably familiar with Dr. Gary Fetke
Yeah.
in Australia. Yeah, he's done a wonderful YouTube video on this called, I think it's Fruit Good or Bad for You? Anyway, it's excellent. And he delves into exactly this. Yeah, for sure. This is a survival mechanism. And I think people with addiction, we're highly attuned to seek out pleasure and avoid pain. It's just gotten really embedded in there
Wow.
to the point where we, have lost control over those urges once the substance or even the behavior or the cue has entered our system to create that whole neural pathway, addictive reward motivation seeking behavior.
That's so interesting. Do you notice with the people you work with, do you notice a difference between genders? Is it more men that get addicted to sugar, more females? Is there any correlation there?
Oh, it's such a good question. I mean, I see it's more women that reach out to me. That being said, I don't think there's any difference. My male and female clients, we all talk about the same cravings, feelings, history, and so on. I think it's just more maybe more socially not acceptable exactly in women. There may be more shame for men in terms of reaching out to ask for help. It could be a body image thing with women that we're that much more concerned about it, that we'd reach out. It's more social, I think, than really. I think you were asking me more about the biochemistry of it. I think the biochemistry, just anecdotally, clinically, is the same.
Gotcha. Interesting. And then, is there somewhat of a genetic component, like you said, like some people can be way too obsessive about it? Is that more genetic, or is that more like the environment that you're in?
That's such a good question. It seems to be, from what I've learned, that there's 4 causes of addiction that can either be single or interrelated. So one of them for sure, biochemical, so genetic or sensitivity. The next one, which is kind of frightening and is preventable, is caused by ingesting of the substances or doing of the behaviors themselves. I know Bitten Johnson talks about that a lot in her training about, early childhood use of a drug like sugar can predispose us to addiction later. The third one is learned behavior. We tend to model as humans. We're pack animals. We copy what we see going on in our homes in front of us. What are our loved ones doing? What are they teaching us to do? What's the neural programming? And then finally, the fourth is a coping mechanism for trauma. Trying to avoid pain, seek pleasure. So there's a couple that are more kind of physiological, biochemical, and then the other 2 are more environmental, learned. But again, it could be any or all of them.
Yeah, interesting. It must be important to learn which one is the primary driver for each individual. Is that right?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, understanding why is nice, and maybe provides a bit of relief or reassurance. But really, it's more we've got a problem. How are we going to deal with it? It's sort of like therapy. Like, it doesn't really matter, why I started wetting the bed. The issue is I'm wetting the bed and I want to stop.
Yeah, good point. Wow.
Yeah.
Huh, interesting. So this may be a stupid question, but how would somebody know if they're addicted to sugar?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I do I can offer a quick screening if you'd like. There's one that I use called the S-Uncope that was created by Norman Hoffman. It's a 6-question substance dependence screen. If you'd like, I could read you the questions.
Sure, that'd be fascinating.
Okay. The first one would be unplanned use. So the question is, in the past year, have you eaten more sugar flour than you intended, or have you spent more time eating sugar or flour than you intended to? So eaten more than intended or spent more time actually doing it.
Gotcha.
Second one would be neglect. Have you ever neglected some of your usual daily responsibilities due to using sugar or flour? Third one is around cutting down. Have you felt that you wanted or needed to cut down on eating flour or sugar in the last year? Fourth one, objected. Has your family, friend, boss, or anyone ever told you they objected to your eating or drinking habits?
Interesting.
Fifth is preoccupation. Have you ever found yourself preoccupied with wanting to eat sugar or flour, or found yourself thinking a lot about eating sugar or flour when you're doing other things?
Mm.
And the final one around emotional discomfort. Have you ever eaten sugar flour to relieve emotional discomfort such as fatigue, irritation, sadness, anger, tiredness, or boredom?
Wow. Those are great
So,
questions.
right? Yeah. So, depending on how many yeses you get, 0 to 1 would indicate kind of normal social use. 2 to 3 yeses would indicate harmful use. So that's more of that kind of behavioral eating disorders, this kind of stuff we were talking about before. Whereas 4 to 6 would be a positive screen for addiction. And then we'd recommend further assessment, which we can talk about in a bit. There's a sugar assessment that dives right into it a lot more comprehensively.
Wow. So I was, again, fortunate, very fortunate, going through in my brain during that assessment, and I would have been down on the 0 to 1, which is great. But I could see how some of the people we work with would have a very uncomfortable time with those questions. I mean, yeah, I could see how pretty quick you would start to put together like, this is going to be an issue.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And something that I think that's really important to realize is that addiction it's like being born left-handed or with a fish allergy. You know, it's no fault of the individual. There's nothing particularly wrong, with us. Other, those of us who are addicted. There's such a negative stigma, is what I'm getting at,
Sure.
and a lot of shame, and a lot of us, try and hide it or lie to ourselves or others about it, or try and negotiate our way out of it and try and moderate and oh God, make it be different. Why can other people do it and not me? What's up with my obsession? Why do I keep binging?
Mm.
When really it is a physiological biochemical response in the system that's just like an allergy. And when we can view it, from that perspective, it's often just such a huge relief. Like it's not my fault. And, the way that I can get relief from it is to learn which of these foods or substances are causing the craving, and then abstain from it and find other ways to eat and nourish ourselves
Wow.
instead.
Well, you already
Mhm.
mentioned mindfulness and meditation as a practice, and what an amazing thing to add to that, so that you can kind of step back and realize that I'm here, I'm watching what's going on. I see those objects and they're not me. That it would be so helpful to be able to know that, and then take a deep breath and make a decision.
Mhm. Mhm.
Wow.
Yes.
You mentioned something else that I think is super interesting, and that's like the justification, or like the stories that we tell ourselves. Bethany, doesn't eat a ton of sugar, and she would come home from work and be, really stressed and trying to settle down and settle into her night. And after dinner, she always used to eat like this bag of organic licorice, and she knew it had a lot of sugar, and it was, it just was what it was. But she just told herself like, I'm this is my treat. This is what I get. Like, this is okay because, I work out and do all these other things. And she realized that the amount of sugar she was eating was like 150 grams in one sitting. I mean, that's more than like a half a cup of sugar. And so she cut it out. And then, it was really hard for her at first, but she started feeling a lot better. Her mood was a lot better. And then come Christmas, she was so excited for Christmas cookies. It's like the thing she looks forward to the most is these Christmas cookies. She'd been talking about them. She's been, planning to eat them, and she eats a few of them and she becomes an absolute wreck. Like she's crying, she's like laughing hysterically, she's getting mad at herself. And it's like, it was so real to see like firsthand, like, wow. And it took a few days to like settle out. It's crazy.
Yes, it really does have a incredibly strong effect on our body, particularly if we're not used to it. We get kind of numb to it when we're eating it all the time. So yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that. And it's probably super disappointing for her, right? Oh, I was so looking forward to it, the romance fantasy around it, and then feeling like a wild animal, like tense and anxious and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
I empathize. Yes.
Wow. And then,
Yeah.
you just drive down the street and you see the soda shop is just the line of cars just wrap around it. And it's popular. It's the most popular. I've looked this up online at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. and 8 p.m. in the afternoon or in the evening, excuse me, which is a few hours after when most people would be eating, which means like what foods are you even eating to get started if they're not satiating you? You should be able to be really satiated and not care about food for a while.
Exactly. And I think that's the whole carbohydrate thing. Casey, are you familiar with Dr. Robert Lustig
Yeah.
and his book, The Hacking of the American Mind?
Yeah, of course. I got to meet him last year at Low Carb Denver.
Beautiful. So he's done, a beautiful expose on exactly what you're talking about, the addiction business model, 55% carbohydrates keep us coming back economically to, keep refueling because we're not satiated. And it's, multi-trillion dollar industry between pharma and the farming and, grocery stores and Starbucks and you name it.
Wow. I mean, it's just one of those things that it must be true because it's so wild. Like you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
So
Systemic.
yep, exactly. So let's go from systemic to personal back to you. Let's go back to 2019. And what were some of the lifestyle practices that you put in place then that ended up being some of those missing puzzle pieces?
Yeah, great question. So in really getting that this was biochemical, I saw a food addiction dietitian who really helped me tweak my food plan. I think I mentioned at the time I was eating a lot of chicken, eggs, greens, and olive oil. But yeah, certainly my macros were off, and I wasn't weighing and measuring because I'd had that sort of kind of traumatic experience 10 years earlier in that 12-step food program where it got so militant. Um, but yeah, she encouraged me to do that, and that was another thing I learned in the food addiction counselor training. They really were a proponent of weighing and measuring because many of us who have addiction have kind of a dysmorphia. We don't have reliable hunger signals. I can't honestly tell if I'm satiated or if I'm emotionally eating. My gauge is broken there. Sometimes I'll undereat and sometimes I'll overeat and I just won't know. So that's where a digital food scale and having consistency is very, very important for treating people with addiction. So 3 meals a day with enough fat and enough protein, and then enough low glycemic greens.
Mm.
So that really helped to balance me right out as a baseline. Yeah, sort of on the food end of things, I guess it was about 14 months ago. I ended up with a different doctor. I had very, very low energy and I couldn't figure out why. And I went in for some blood testing and it turned out I had really, really dreadful anemia. Like I was down at 11 or something like that in terms of the red blood cells.
Mm.
And it was a different doctor that day. It was actually the husband of the doctor who had gone on maternity leave. And he was asking me about my diet. And I told him I was kind of paleo keto. And he told me he was carnivore. And I remember being horrified. I'm like, what do you mean you don't eat vegetables? I mean, everybody knows that vegetables are good for you. I mean, it's the one thing that all of us food war people, it's kind of a religious thing, the vegans and the this and that, right? Yeah, but I'm like, vegetables have to be good for you. And he's like, well, I feel really good not with it. And I think he showed me MeatRX, Sean Baker's website. And anyway, I think I had some questions for him about vitamin C and scurvy and fiber. And anyway, I guess he answered them and said, no, it doesn't seem to be a problem. Look up this website. And it was about 5 months later. I didn't realize, I guess, Casey, you know how you don't know what normal or you don't sort of know what feeling good is when you don't have anything else to compare it to. Like I think I'm feeling good, but I don't. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yes,
Anyway,
100%.
yeah, I was working at home. I had done for years. I'd been a corporate sales executive in a tech company and done different things. And I guess I'd been having. I guess my gas had been worse than I thought it was because I was always alone, so I didn't really pay much attention to it. And I went away and did this course where I was in a room for 8 hours a day with other people. And it was at the end of those days where I realized, like, oh my God, like the amount of gas I normally pass during the course of any day because I'd been holding it in was really, it was like doubling me over by the end of the day. And I thought the
Wow.
only thing it can be is these vegetables. So what the heck? I'm going to try this carnivore thing that this doctor suggested a few months ago. And it was like night and freaking day within a few days of eliminating the vegetables. well, the gas and bloating completely went away. Uh, I felt satiated, honestly, for the first time that I could remember in my life, in my whole adult life. And my mood balanced out. Like it kind of went from this kind of restless, slightly always irritated, kind of always craving at the back of my mind to calm. It was like someone finally turned off that white noise in the back of my head.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was the carbohydrate in vegetables.
Wow.
The missing link. And I was eating maybe 10 grams, I was only eating a little bit of lettuce and maybe a bit of broccoli. But by getting rid of that, yeah, made all the difference. So that was 14 months ago.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear that just across the board with the more people I work with on carnivore. It sounds crazy. You're definitely going to die if you try this, but like, yeah, the thing I noticed the most, I've talked about this before, like I feel like my mental clarity was pretty good on keto and I enjoyed that. But when I went to strict carnivore, I did it for about a year. My reaction to stress was completely different.
Yes,
I just,
exactly.
something big would happen and I'd lose money on something, make a stupid decision, but I would just like be able to shrug it off more, where before it would, I'd be a positive, optimistic person, but not be able to deal with the stress the same.
Really well put, Casey. That was exactly it. Yeah. Yeah, I did. I just felt like my baseline elevated by about 50 points and just like stayed there. Like, yeah. Yeah.
And just like you said, if you haven't experienced that, you have no idea what you're missing. You have no idea what you're
Yes.
missing. The difference
Yes.
between what you said, which is the satiety versus fullness. Like if you don't understand what it's like to be fully satiated, like you are missing out because it's amazing.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And I should probably underline though, because I think this may be important for your listeners who may be struggling with knowing how much to eat and still struggling with binge eating because they may have a latent addiction thing. Um, is overeating or binge eating? There is again kind of a biological component to that where serotonin gets released when our stomachs are stretched out beyond a certain point. And that can be a real addiction for some people. Do you remember I was saying earlier that I was getting high off the binging and purging?
Yeah.
Same sort of thing. Like there's an endorphin, some kind of biochemical addictive response there. Same thing with the binge eating. So that's where weighing and measuring and not getting too overly full can be very, very helpful for someone who's struggling with that. And being very clear on what the macros are. Like I've experimented with different. I've done 1 meal a day, 2 meals, 3 meals a day to kind of see what the difference is. And it's better for me, someone who has a history of binging and purging, to have smaller, lower volume meals that don't stretch me out, so I don't get that full trigger. I have right now 6 ounces of protein, usually fish or beef, and then 3 measured out tablespoons of fat per meal. And that seems to be my ideal macro. Now, not everybody's the same. They might need less fat or more protein, but it's finding that kind of magic formula and then sticking with it. And then days that I'm exercising more than others, or if it's really cold out, I'll make an adjustment, by a tablespoon here or an ounce or 2 there. But,
That's so
not
smart.
significantly, but enough for satiety.
Wow.
That's a big difference for people with addiction. Yeah.
That's so interesting. That's a really good point. I've really changed my mind about that over the years. I'm sitting next to my nutrition coaching certification, which recommends, the meals and snacks every day and to, eat the rainbow and lots of colors and, how to not weigh things and not track things. But I think I agree with you now that does have a place, dialing in what you're doing and really being mindful about it, I think is really smart. And I also agree, like we invite so many people on and jokingly tell them like, just to tell us like what to eat so we can end this for good. And you'll be our last podcast guest. And we can all ride off in the sunset, but without that experimentation, like you're going to have a really tough time. So I think that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things, I guess, related to that nutrition coaching certification, it was really big on variety. You need to get a wide variety of lots of foods so you can cover all your nutritional needs, lots of different colors, and again, the rainbow and all that stuff. We have found that as we have gone more and more on the carnivore side of things, we're not eating very many things. Like we have 3 or 4 different staples that we'll make for dinner. We normally just eat a meal a day, sometimes 2. But how do we ride the line between, having all of our nutrients provided for us versus not eating a tremendous variety of different things?
That is a good question, and I don't have the same nutrition background that you do. I'm more on the addiction side of things. So what I do and what I recommend for my clients is that they are medically monitored and just get their blood markers checked. Actually, this is an interesting thing that I discovered recently. You remember I mentioned that I had really super low iron before,
Yeah.
and then I went on carnivore. So I've been doing carnivore for the last 14 months, and I did, well, sorry, let me back up. I did take iron supplements for a bit to build myself up, and it was working. I would have these supplements with vitamin C. Anyway, then I went on carnivore and I went off them because I thought, well, all I eat is freaking red meat for the most part. So that's going to solve the issue, right? And I got tested again recently and I was back down again at 23. So for whatever reason, my body does not absorb the iron present in anything, whether it's spinach or red meat, without a vitamin C supplement.
Interesting.
So yeah, but I wouldn't have known that because otherwise I've been feeling good. I didn't feel low energy like I did, back then. So yeah, getting regular blood work done, I think is important. And the other thing that I think is important too, if people are noticing that they're still feeling inflamed or whatever, low blood pressure, just different things, to look at getting food sensitivity testing done. Dairy seems to be a particularly noxious one. It's when I'm recommending food plans for people with severe addiction, I always knock out dairy, and part of that is because it's got a lot of casomorphine in it. It tends to trigger that brain reward system, the opiates, and so on. So that's the major reason. But the other reason is it does seem to cause inflammation and preventing the weight loss that a lot of people are really hoping for whatever reason. I don't know if it's the growth factor in it or if it's because it's designed to put a baby cow to sleep and double its weight in 6 weeks, some magical thing in it. But yeah, dairy can be problematic. So yeah, having food sensitivity testing can be helpful too.
That is super helpful. You mentioned you being more on the addiction side of things. So I want to ask you about the importance of connection and community. I remember a book by, I believe it was Johann Hari. He talked about the war on drugs. I think it's called Chasing the Scream. And he made a point that not only were we completely goofing up the war on drugs in the worst way, but he made a point to say that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection, it's connectivity. So rather than, his point was rather than taking somebody who's addicted to drugs and throw them in a jail cell and cut off their ability to even get a job when they get out versus, let's get this person more involved in the community, let's get them a job, let's get them a purpose. That working so much better. What is the role of connection and connectivity in with food addiction?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I love Johann Hari, and yes, I'm often quoting him. Yeah, the opposite of addiction is connection. And yes, the recovery protocol model is breaks down into these percentages. So 10% at most, maybe 5%, is the food plan, right? It's basically ground zero. We've got to abstain from the addictive substances and behaviors that are stimulating, the dopamine reward pathway in the brain. That is just the price of entry. The next 40% is relapse prevention. So that would be sleep, exercise, education, serotonin boosting activities, including connection. The other 50% though is all about that. It's all about connection, individual and group support. And this is why 12-step programs tend to have such good results for people with all types of addictions, is because people are meeting together with a common purpose, common goal. They are facilitated by ourselves, each other. So there's that sense of service, the sense of belonging, the sense of purpose. There's also the intimacy created with people honestly, vulnerably sharing about, hopes, thoughts, dreams, goals, problems, challenges, successes, which we don't do that in our culture these days. We're busy, we're on our phones, we're trying to look good, we're trying to be cool, we're trying to act, like we don't need anybody, we're on top of it. When really, people are getting more and more isolated and cut off. So yeah. long answer to a short question. Yes, connection is absolutely key, and that is one of the things that I include with my programs. Is I've got 2 included groups that meet per week. One of them's at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning. The other's at 5 p.m. Well, 8 p.m. right now. We're about to move it with daylight savings to 5 p.m. on Monday night. And then we have a WhatsApp chat group that's sort of going 24/7, and people working with each other in a buddy system to do various exercises on values, on connection, on just different activities to keep us focused and in the solution with each other, right? It's hard to swim against the tide. It's hard when we're living in a carb-centric world. And, when you're looking at your other family members who are eating like 2 bites of cake and then leaving the rest of it on a plate because they're satiated. And you're like, oh my God, why am I so different? What's wrong with me? Why can't I stop thinking about the cake? And if I eat it, then it's even worse, right? So we need to be with people like us in order to heal and start to feel better and get that sense of, normalcy, pride, and baseline productivity and functionality happening again.
Mm. And in a time when, we're not really meeting in person, I think those groups are so helpful. I mean, social media is what it is and has its pros and cons, but that is one thing that I think can be really beneficial for people is if you've got an interest in something, could be anything really. Even with us doing the podcast, just being on podcasting groups and having the ability to ask questions, get advice is really helpful. And so we definitely would encourage the listener to sign up and take part in that, because that sounds really, really helpful. You mentioned your coaching program. Tell us a little bit more about like what it would be like to work with you, how you work with people, and what that program's like.
Yeah. So I start everybody with an assessment. So people fill out a 12-page questionnaire that goes into your food and weight history. Usually people come to me because of that. They're like, I'm so sick of this yo-yo dieting, or I just need to find a food plan or a diet that helps, So we go into all of that, as well as any meds, any supplements, childhood, your sleep patterns, different underlying, physiological symptoms, super comprehensive. So they fill that out, and then we spend an hour on Zoom going through that together, kind of connecting the dots on that. And then if it's looking like there also that 6-question screening that's within there as well. If it's looking like someone does have addiction, then we move ahead and do a 1-hour-long sugar assessment. So sugar is a tool created by Bitten Johnson, who I mentioned, addiction specialist in Sweden, that mirrors substance use disorder tests in the ICD-10 as well as the DSM-5. It's 67 questions, takes about an hour to go through. And it shows us, is this person a harmful eater or addicted? And if addicted, how severe is it? And then I take usually a day and a half to amalgamate everything from that pre-assessment evaluation, the conversations, the sugar results, and come up with a treatment protocol for people. And then we get together for another hour the next day. So I spend a lot of time with people, really getting to know them and what will work and what are their individual responses. And then I've got treatment plans. So there'll be some medical tests. Always want them to loop in their doctor or naturopath so that we can triage together. A food plan, baseline food plan that eliminates all addictive foods. This is, of course, if people do assess as addicted. And then we do a sleep chronotype as well to get their biorhythms kind of back in order, so they're not working against themselves in terms of, when are they exercising, eating, sleeping, that kind of thing. We'll look at exercise because that's super helpful for boosting mood. Education is massive. I give a lot of educational materials out there, both about low carb, healthy fat food plans. I'm very biased towards that. It works wonders for people with addiction because these kind of foods do not stimulate the reward pathways of the brain.
That's right.
As long as we're staying away from nuts and dairy, those are 2 things that I should mention that are problematic for most addicts. So tons of education about the food, metabolic, nutritional end of things, because this is a whole new way of being for most people. And then lots of education and information about addiction, the addictive mind, how that all works. We didn't even really get into that today, but there's so much there to learn about. And then finally, that individual and group support piece. So immediately, people are then included in the WhatsApp group. They come to the Zoom meetings that meet twice a week. And then I recommend that they get out there and start using whatever other community resources. There's not a ton out there. I shouldn't say there's not a ton. Other than 12-step programs, there's not a lot of great food addiction recovery, low-cost service. But what there is, I'll put people in touch with. And then from there, people will go for the next couple of weeks on their new food plan. I want them to be in touch with me daily. So they'll email me, let me know, what is their committed food for the day, as well as what were their withdrawal symptoms the day before and what recovery activities did they do the day before. So that's setting up that connection with me as a practice point, and getting that accountability, as well as tweaking it. If someone's really hungry or feeling really sluggish, well, then we know, okay, well, let's lower the vegetables or let's increase the fat, that kind of thing. And then after 2 weeks, we have our wrap-up call for our wrap-up Zoom for half an hour. And usually people have gone through, most of the withdrawal and they're feeling pretty settled. And then, by then they can carry on. They don't need me. I want people to be empowered and not have to, rely on, professional help, so that it's cost effective. That being said, if people do want or need, additional help from me, I do, individual appointments. I do monthly packages for people who really need a lot of help. I'll even do daily check-ins and coaching that way.
Wow, what a comprehensive program. I love how much assessing there is. I think that's missing from a lot of programs out there. They just jump in and assume, where you are and what your goals are, when that may or may not be the case. And so that assessment piece is so helpful. Do you have a favorite, like a success story, somebody that you've taken through the program that saw great success?
Yes, I've got a couple, and they're all different. So there's one woman who had suffered with severe underweight since she was 11, and she was introduced to me. She's actually 13 hours away from me, so it's interesting getting together on Zoom. But so she 48, and she was actually had been hospitalized probably 3 times a year for about the last 10 years. So very, very severe case of addictive. Well, her addiction process was under eating, laxative use, exercise addiction. And so she'd been hospitalized, fed, had to gain 15 kilos, all on flour and sugar. It's just horrendous how people are refed. So 6 weeks, 15 kilos, cake, sugar, carbs. And I was on the phone or Zoom phone with her pretty well every day while she was in the hospital. When she got out at a stable weight, we then immediately switched her over to, and she did the sugar assessment, by the way. This is when I was still in training. So Bitten was kind of mentoring us through it. Of course, she has severe addiction, eating process addiction. And so went on the low carb, higher fat program. Anyway, that's 14 months ago. She's been maintaining her weight for the first time in her entire life, since age 11. Her dietitian was just vehemently negative when, she told, my client told her that she was going on this, ketogenic diet. She just, you're going to fail. It's another sick diet. You're going to be sick. Da, da, da. So my client is actually delighting in going in for her, whatever it is, biweekly and now monthly weigh-ins. And she's like, I feel great. I look great. Everything's good. This is the only thing that works,
Wow.
Anyway, so and she's doing amazing, absolutely amazing. Her life is transformed,
So
not
cool.
just with the food, obviously, but with all of the other components of recovery. She's now helping other people, and actually, she's mentoring another young woman who was also chronic in a similar way. She's 29 and she's thriving. She's been with us for 4 months now and enjoying similar results. She didn't have to go the hospitalization route. We were able to get her stabilized and slowly gaining the weight, just using the same principles and food program.
Wow.
So those are successful. And then there's another woman who came to me recently about 5 months ago. Her weight had been over 400 pounds. She came to me after 5 years on keto. She'd gotten stuck down at 328 and just didn't know what else she could do. We assessed that she did have dairy sensitivity. And when she eliminated that and then started doing 2 meals a day, that made a big difference, as well as all the other recovery protocol things, more connection, regular contact with me. We've been in regular contact daily for 5 months now. She's now down at 2 meals a day. And she also had quite a shift when she went to carnivore. That was about 2 months ago. So her weight loss got better, and any and all hunger or cravings went away for her too.
Wow.
Mood elevated when she dropped even just the little bit of vegetable. So she's been doing well. And yeah, probably about a year from now, she should be, optimal body weight if this trajectory continues, which there's no reason why it wouldn't.
That's amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
And there's several others, but yeah, those are two good ones.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's just like we talked about earlier. If people understood like how good you could really feel, you can put some of this stuff in the rear view. It's not as hard as it sounds. It's not as miserable as it sounds. In fact, it's really amazing and easy to do. And I think more people should just try it. Like do what I did. I tried it for a month. I told myself I wanted to see how I felt. I thought it sounded crazy, and I never stopped the experiment because it feels amazing. It's really easy. What are you working on for the future?
Trying to be more accessible to more people. Not everybody can afford, I keep my prices pretty low considering everything that I do. That being said, the groups I'm working on, I'm actually working with a doctor right now, obesity medicine specialist who specializes in low carb. We've got an addiction education group that's going to morph into a weekly group. So I'd like to offer more of those at a drop-in cost for people who can't afford the one-on-one coaching or maybe can't yet afford to have the full assessment protocol with me. So that should be rolled out soon within the next couple of months. And then I'm also working on a stage 2 for people who have stabilized and they're at least sort of 90 days abstinent, but who are still maybe feeling a little bit mood compromised. Maybe there's some underlying medical stuff. There's a biochemical repair protocol that I learned with Bitten Johnson, and I'll be rolling that out as well as another service that people can enter into with me. And then thirdly, releasing more information about addiction, food addiction, and the brain and how that all works. I've got a young person in my life who's helping me with this social media confusion to get the stuff up on YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and all of that sort of thing, so people can get this information for free and hopefully get some relief from if they're suffering from any of these things with the information about food addiction.
Would you be upset with me if I hire that person away from you?
Yes. You know what?
Frustrating.
She would probably share. She's great.
That's great. Wow, this has been such an amazing conversation. I really hope this drives some awareness behind this, because I think a lot of people don't even, they just simply don't know. They're not aware of this. It's a software program that's running unconsciously in their lives. And I hope people can, get this message and hear this message. What is one simple takeaway you'd want somebody to have if maybe this is the first time they've ever heard about, food addiction?
Yeah, just be gentle with yourself. Breathe a sigh of relief. This is not your fault. There's nothing, bad or broken or wrong about you. And there is help. And by all means, reach out. I always do a 30-minute complimentary Zoom consult with people. I'm happy to chat if you want to call me and just tell me some of the stuff that you've been suffering with. I empathize. I lived it, and it doesn't have to continue.
Wow, that's so cool. I've seen that on your website, and I just think that's amazing that you would offer that for people. And I really hope a lot of people take you up on that, because that's just great. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, so easiest is to just look me up on my website, which is www.sugartest.net. I'll say that again, www.sugartest.net. And then you can just click on the link there, and that will send me an email, and we can get together. Yeah, I talk at my bio, and everything is on there as well.
Yeah, that's great. Super helpful information. We are very, very grateful for you and for your work and for coming onto our show today to share your message. Jayn Steele, it's been an absolute honor. So thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Oh, pleasure's all mine, Casey. Thank you again for finding me wherever you did in the social media world and inviting me here. This has been great.
Of course. So glad that I was able to, and I'm looking forward to much more of your content, because like I said, I don't think this is going to be your last one.
Thank you.
Awesome. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.